Our next panel is actually one that we've never done before. So I'm very curious to see how this works out. Michael, no pressure, but come on up. You're going to moderate this. And he'll be talking to Dr. Dalia Rotstein and Dr. Anya about how patients can get involved in advancing the understanding and research of rare neuroimmune research. So please join us on stage.
We're going to start with a short presentation by Dr. Rotstein on the importance of clinical trials and patient participation in clinical trials.
Yeah, so this panel is about research and how we can contribute to improving understanding of these conditions. So first off, I want to say a huge thank you. Many of the people in this room have already contributed to research in the CANOPTICS study. And we know, this takes a lot of your time. You're probably getting emails about the questionnaires you have to complete on a regular basis. But I want to share with you a little bit about the study and also how it's already leading to improvements in care for NMOSD and MOGAD in Canada. And we hope many more insights in years to come. So first of all, we've talked a lot about the acronyms today that are really a mouthful, and CANOPTICS is also, hopefully CANOPTICS itself is an easy word to say. So you have the CAN, of course, which is Canada, and the optics, which is the optic nerve. We wanted to get the spinal cord in there, but it didn't really fit. But we were looking for something catchy because we know that these words can be a mouthful. So the long form of CANOPTICS is a Canadian neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder and other atypical demyelinating diseases cohort study. That's a long part, but we know there are people who also have isolated, transverse myelitis or optic neuritis, and we wanted to include them too. And we're very grateful for the support of MS Canada and also Canada's Drug Agency, which has helped make this research possible. So here are some of our aims with CANOPTICS. Well, first of all, in the most basic sense, we just want to investigate characteristics of these diseases in adults in Canada. So when we started this research, there had been a lot that was published other places in the world about NMOSD and MOGAD, but we didn't have the most basic facts of what these diseases look like in adults in Canada. So Dr. Ye and her team, they had some facts about the children who were affected by these diseases, but we don't know even simple numbers like how many people actually have NMOSD and MOGAD in Canada, and what are their characteristics, like what's the mean age of onset? That means the average age of onset. And do we see the same types of attacks here in Canada as we see other places in the world? So we've already learned a lot on that front. And the next goal is to evaluate the efficacy and adverse event profiles of therapies in real world practice. So what does that one mean? Well, basically, we want to understand how well these medications work and what are some common side effects that people experience. So we have the clinical trial data, but clinical trials often exclude people with real conditions. So they exclude people with other medical diseases, like other autoimmune diseases. They exclude pregnant women, for example. So we want to see how these medications really play out in real world practice, so we as doctors can give you the best information possible. We also wanted to establish a network of providers and participants interested in contributing to research in this area. And I'm really fortunate to have many dedicated colleagues. But for example, Dr. Casserly, who is here today from London, I met her through doing this work in NMOSD, and she became one of the site leaders for the study. So we've been able to pull in people across the country who have a dedicated interest in contributing to care for people with NMOSD, MOGAD, and other rare inflammatory diseases. We also want to share our data with other international groups. So with rare diseases, every patient counts, and it's also really important that we put together the data from countries around the world. So you may have heard this concept of statistical power. It means to be certain of our findings, we need a certain number of people included in the studies. And for NMOSD and MOGAD, in order to do that, we need to put together our findings, with people from the USA and people from Europe who have these conditions too. And lastly, we want to improve patient-centered care and outcomes for people living with these diseases. So when we send out those questionnaires, we're learning more about the hidden symptoms of the disease, and that helps us better tailor what kind of care we offer in the clinic and other allied health professionals that we refer our patients to. So you saw this slide earlier in Dr. Cassersley's talk. The red stars are just all the sites we have across Canada contributing to this research. So now I'm proud to say that we have 9 sites in 5 provinces, and we're expanding to at least 3 more as part of our recent grant from Canada's Drug Agency. So this is kind of a busy slide, but this is all that happens in CANOPTICS. And there's a lot going on. So there are a lot of data we need to collect. We need to collect data about people's antibody status. We collect data about how the first attack began. We collect data about what kind of therapy somebody's on and why they changed therapy and how they respond to the new therapy. So it's very important, we collect the data at baseline and then also on an annual basis. So as it happens with everything, there's some fatigue factor over time, right? So you're really excited the year that you sign up for the study, but then you're like, oh yeah, now I'm getting these emails all the time from CANOPTICS. We know that happens. And we know, it's human nature to get a little tired over time. But one of the really key things is we need to learn about how the disease changes over time and how it changes, with different medications and also what the other studies reveal, like what the MRIs reveal. So thank you so much for keeping up your energy and continuing on an annual basis, because those longitudinal data over several years are really what's going to make the difference. So we wanted to talk a little bit about new research directions. So you may be hearing from our team because one of the directions we're hoping to expand into is biomarker work. So Dr. Mucilli spoke earlier about how important this is in neurology today. Like we used to have those hammers and, we still bring them out, let's be honest, at the visits. But now we know that we can learn a lot from somebody's blood by looking for unique different proteins. And that research has come a huge way in multiple sclerosis, but it's still in its infancy for NMOSD and MOGAD. So we may be asking you to donate a blood sample and even to donate a new sample every year, if you're willing. Of course, it's only with your consent, but that will give us important information over time so we can use those markers before an attack occurs and decide which treatment is best for you. Another area of research is the health claims data linkage sub-study. So for a lot of you in Ontario, you've already participated in this, but in other provinces, we're rolling it out. And for example, it's allowed us to calculate recently in Ontario what our incidence and prevalence of NMOSD is. And that's information that we can give to policymakers. We can say to government, look, what we found is NMOSD only affects 1 in 100,000 people in Ontario. Well, those numbers aren't that big. So you should give us access to these drugs. They're expensive, but at the end of the day, this is nothing compared to cancer. So those data really help us when we're trying to put forward, a case to different decision makers in this space. So CANOPTICS by the numbers, thank you so much. I think the numbers are really impressive considering this study only started in 2021. We have 361 participants in total. We have 158 with antibody positive NMOSD. That's actually up with some of the biggest cohorts in the world. We have 122 with MOGAD, and that's one of the areas where we're growing most quickly. And we have 81 with seronegative demyelinating conditions. So these are some of the papers that we've published from the work and from the data you've contributed. So one study that's kind of near and dear to my heart, it's a study about the prodrome to NMOSD. So this is just to give you an example. So I heard from many people who had been coming through my clinic that they actually had some unusual symptoms even years before their first NMOSD attack. Like they had some unusual pain or itching. I heard from a few people that they had visual symptoms that just lasted, for a few minutes or a couple of hours and wasn't a full-fledged attack. And then when we looked at this on a population level, and we also used OHIP data, we actually found that it does seem to be a prodromal period to NMOSD, where symptoms may start in a subtle way up to sort of 2 to 5 years before the first attack. And that's the first time any group had reported that. And since then, a Korean group has also looked at it using their national health data, and they found similar patterns. And why is that important? Well, in the future, we might be able to identify people with these prodromal symptoms before the first attack. And if we could do the diagnostic blood test in those people, potentially we could intervene even before the first attack to prevent any disability from arising. So that's just one example of the kind of research that is coming out of CANOPTICS. So, of course, a lot of our work also has to do with reaching out to people living with the disease. An important example is the patient day that we're experiencing here today, and many thanks to the Sumaira Foundation team. We also have a monthly newsletter where we profile some of our research, but also patient stories. So if you're interested in sharing your story, please reach out to me or Nandita. And I have to give Nandita the credit for this because she puts together the monthly newsletter and it's kind of her brainchild. So much appreciated. Thank you, Nandita. And here are a few examples of patient stories. So we have Akhil, who's an incredible artist, and he has created images that represent some of the patient journey and what his experience of the disease is. And we have Pauline Richardson, who has been an important patient advocate and has also shared her story in a recent edition of the newsletter. Thank you, Pauline. So we also just wanted to briefly put up sort of some of the resources you can access online from trusted sources, as Dr. Bruno said. So we have QR codes, we have the MS Canada guide, we have the Sumaira Foundation resources, including webinars, and there are also patient support groups that are accessible through the Sumaira Foundation website. The MOG project is another organization specifically for people who experience MOG antibody disease. And the Guthrie-Jackson Foundation, which is US-based and also represents NMOSD. So thank you to my co-investigators and to the many, many people who make CANOPTICS possible. And thank you for your participation.
So I think that presentation gives you some feeling for how research advances the state of medicine. And in fact, anyone with MOGAD in the room, that used to be considered a seronegative NMOSD patient until people started studying biomarkers and looking for another antibody, and they finally found one, and that allowed a whole new disease entity to be defined and differentiated. And now there are drugs in development specifically for MOGAD. That's how progress is made. So maybe just a broader question to open it up to not just CANOPTICS study, but research in general. Could, Dr. Ye, maybe starting with you, could you just explain what is clinical research? What is it in general for the lay people in the room?
Yeah, this is really important. And I think a lot of you already participate in research studies. Like Dr. Rotstein at SickKids, we have a registry that's been going on for many years. And we have about, and what I see that's so delightful for me is that I see some former patients and families who have participated in this registry for years. And what clinical research is understanding, using a scientific mindset to understand why things happen in a clinical realm. And it translates over to, can we take things that we see going on clinically, why you can't see or why you're having trouble moving, and move it over back to the wet lab, meaning looking in the Petri dish or in animals, to understand what those processes are, or using biomarkers like Dr. Rotstein pointed out, to understand whether we can predict why the eye is doing what it is, and then bringing it back. In practical terms, it involves exactly what Dr. Rotstein was talking about, being willing to participate in the ongoing questions that all of us have about why things are happening to your bodies that can't be explained, and joining us on that journey to try to understand that through things that could be very annoying, questionnaires, blood draws, other things like physical examinations that are more frequent than you might expect. Those are all things that can help us to understand things better on a big scale and make change. So that's really what clinical research is.
Anything to add?
I think it was a pretty thorough response. I mean, I just wanted to add that we have different types of clinical research. So there are, the drug trials, like randomized control trials, and those have, really moved the needle, especially in NMOSD over the last few years. And we know with every clinical trial, you're taking a risk because sometimes you don't know what kind of medication you're going to end up on. And there are a lot of visits, as Dr. Ye mentioned, but those clinical trials have really moved the field forward. And we may have some opportunities in the next few years here in Toronto to offer participation in clinical trials, especially in MOGAD. So please, keep your ears open. But there's another type of clinical research called observational research, which is a type of research we're doing in CANOPTICS, where we just watch people, right? That's literally what observation means. And that's a really important aspect too, because we learn about the diversity of our population here in Canada. And because, like I said before, people who have more challenging conditions are actually often excluded from the clinical trials. So I think it's really important we do that type of research as well. And you'll hear more about how it's evolving here in Toronto over the next few years.
Can I add something about clinical trials? Because I think what you said is so important, Dr. Rotstein. So clinical trials in rare conditions are really, really, really hard to finish. We have a clinical trial open we have trials in NMOSD and in MOG-related disorders open at SickKids. When we go into the room to talk to people about the trials, we try very hard to present them as important to do, but we don't want to force people to do them. One of the challenges when you hear about what's going on in the trial is that in these trials, you either get a drug or you get something else. And that's a real turnoff for people. It's very, very hard to hear that. Because that's the elephant in the room. It's really, really hard to hear that. And many people say to me, they actually say, why would we even consider doing that? That makes zero sense to me. There's risk involved. And as Dr. Rotstein alluded to, we don't know the answers about whether or not you're actually going to get worse if you don't get the treatment. But on the other hand, the trials are put together because we don't know the answer. We talked about this in the pediatric room. In the pediatric, in my world, more than in the adult world, but really in this world that we share together, there's a lot we don't know. But as physicians, we are compelled to do something. And very frequently, we almost always, because in pediatrics, 90% of drugs are not tested. They're not tested because we don't have enough numbers and things like that, not because it's dangerous. And they're found to be safe, but we don't know how well they work. So it is really, really important that I think it's for the people in the room to understand that even though we are using medicines, we offer you medicines, these trials are the way for us to really understand whether what we are doing actually makes a difference. And I know it's hard for you to hear, and it's really hard to say, because as a physician, when I go in the room, I say, I think this is going to work for you. I want this to work for you. And I have pretty good confidence that it probably will work for you. But I haven't always tested the medicine in comparison to nothing. Because the risk of doing nothing in a clinical setting could be devastating. And as physicians, we have a really hard time of saying, I can do nothing or I could do something.
Yeah, and maybe just to build on this point, some of this gets reflected ultimately in the way the trials are designed. So for example, the most recent drug approved for NMOSD, they didn't use a placebo. They used I won't even get into the details, a synthetic placebo arm, because they thought it was unethical to put patients on placebo with treatments already available for NMOSD. So the key here is, if you have an opportunity to join a study, get the details, contact the principal investigators, the centers that are doing the trials. They will explain the trial to you, and then you can decide on your own with your family, with your clinician, whether the trial makes sense for you. Couple points I always make to patients. A condition like MOGAD, there are no approved treatments right now. And until quite recently, no approved treatments for NMOSD. The only way you got answers to whether anything works was through trials. There are 2 trials ongoing right now for MOGAD. And sometimes this is a way for patients that aren't responding to off-label therapies to get a different therapy. You can't get onto these drugs in development unless you're in a trial. So that's one reason to consider a trial. Another reason to consider a trial is you can often get access to some of the very best doctors in the world in these rare diseases who are running these studies. Dr. Ye, Dr. Rotstein in Canada are 2 of the top people. When we go to conferences, they're presenting to thousands of doctors in the room at the same time, et cetera. This is a way for you to potentially get to a doctor that really is an expert on your condition. And that improves not just potentially how your condition is being treated, but everything else, how you're being monitored, all the biomarkers that Dr. Rotstein's study is looking at. Those are things they're going to test on you every time. Your average doctor in a smaller hospital without the resources, without the expertise, would they ever do that? Maybe not. Maybe that would tell you something about your disease that you didn't know about. So as a patient advocate, I see all these reasons why participating in trials can be very beneficial to patients. Any parting thoughts, because we're close to time, any parting thoughts for the group, trials that you have ongoing that you're enrolling into, or any other?
I'll mention a few of the things that we're enrolling in. And so we have several open aquaporin 4 positive NMOSD trials, one with ravulizumab, one with inebilizumab, and we have a MOG trial with an IL-6 inhibitor called satralizumab. So those are 3 of the ongoing trials. And in the NMDA area, we have a trial looking at the use also of satralizumab, which is another drug, which is an IL-6 inhibitor. And then we have our open registry, like Dr. Rotstein, and I feel like we're twins up here. Dr. Rotstein and I run parallel registries, and so we have a national registry that we've been running for a number of years, and we've had the privilege of being able to ask the question. And I'll tell you that the Canada's Drug Agency is paying attention. I want to tell you this. They are paying attention because there are drugs available for aquaporin 4 related disease. MOG will be the next. And we are I would say one of the few diseases, myasthenia gravis is one of them as well, where there is actually proof that a drug works, and Health Canada and FDA have said yes. And the drug people, CDA, want to know how it's being used. And so they are watching, they care about you. The next thing is going to be autoimmune encephalitis because those trials are ongoing. And so I just want to let you know that we are always trying to open our doors to new projects. We've got a lot ongoing. And for patients that have been in our clinic, you know that every single person is part of our team and our quest for knowledge. And we are so grateful that something like 99% of the patients that come to our clinic are willing to participate.
I just had one final word about research in these conditions. So I want to convey that in NMOSD and MOGAD and these other rare neuroimmunologic conditions like autoimmune encephalitis, really every person who participates counts because these are such rare disorders. And there's a big difference between having, if we have 150 people in our study or 100, you can tell a lot more when you have a greater number of people. So even though I'm dedicated to MS research too, I have to tell you, we don't approach MS research in the same way. We don't go after the patients as much as we do with NMOSD and MOGAD, I'll be honest. And when we have a new person who's interested in the study, I send Nandita like a whole slew of emails. Did you talk to them? What's their follow-up? And we don't intend to pressure you, but I just want you to understand that you do count. Every person counts. And the reason why we can sit here today with, effective drugs for NMOSD is because of those people who participated in the clinical trials all over the world. So thank you for all that you're doing to help other people with NMOSD and MOGAD, autoimmune encephalitis, and myasthenia gravis.
And a few more points, just because this is such an important topic. Another way you can make a difference by enrolling is you can keep a study going. Unfortunately, a study was recently stopped for MOGAD because of lack of enrollment. And maybe that drug worked. The mechanism seemed to be plausible. They just couldn't enroll. And drug companies at some point say, we can't keep the study open. We have to move on. We're going to stop the trial. So that's one point. The other point I'd like to make is we are ourselves, Samara Foundation, with help from many researchers around the world, starting a trial to compare the 4 approved NMOSD therapies against rituximab. For those that don't know, rituximab works for many patients, but it's off-label, it's standard of care. And now that these new drugs are available, many countries around the world force patients to go on rituximab, which is not proven, and fail on it before they can get access to the on-label medicines. And that's a problem because if you have a relapse with NMOSD, many of you know, it can be severe, it can be life-altering. You could end up blind, you could end up in a wheelchair, many other problems. So we believe it's not ethical to force patients to step through a treatment that's not proven, but we need the data to show that. And what that means is we have to do a clinical trial with 540 NMOSD patients around the world. We have sites in Germany, in the US. We have several sites lined up in Canada as well, in Japan, in Korea, hopefully China and France. So we're going to be starting this project, but this is the data you need to enable access to these drugs. These NMOSD therapies have been available for years now, yet many patients can't get access to them. We need data to show why access is important as first-line therapies. So with that, I'll stop there. I don't know if anyone has questions, but we probably don't have time. So thank you very much.